It's not your neighborhood.
She followed me into a private gym to enforce HOA dress code violations. And that's when management reminded her authority ended at the neighborhood sign. The workout had barely started when the whole thing went sideways. It was a midweek afternoon, slow hour, the kind where half the people are on lunch break and the other half are pretending leg day isn't happening. This gym wasn't part of the HOA in any way. It sat 2 blocks outside the neighborhood boundary, privately owned, card access only. I'd scanned in, tossed my bag in a locker, and started warming up like normal, minding my own business. About 10 minutes in, the front doors opened and in walked Karen, heels clicking on rubber flooring like she was lost on purpose. She didn't look around or hesitate. She came in holding a familiar clipboard, the same beige one I'd seen at HOA meetings, with printed violation forms clipped tight on top. No gym bag. No towel. No membership wristband. That alone should have tipped her off that she was out of her lane, but confidence does wild things to people. She made a straight line for me, weaving past machines like she'd rehearsed the route. I was mid-set when she stopped right in front of the rack and cleared her throat. Loud. She said my attire violated HOA dress standards, specifically mentioning tank tops and inappropriate display. I thought she was joking for half a second. Then I saw the paper in her hand and realized she was dead serious. I racked the weight and told her she might be confused because this was a gym, not the neighborhood. She shook her head and said HOA rules apply to residents regardless of location. She spoke like she was explaining gravity to a child. A couple people nearby slowed their reps, definitely listening now. That was the first shift. What should have been a quiet workout instantly turned into a public confrontation. She tried to hand me a violation form right there between the squat rack and the mirror wall. I didn't take it. I told her she needed to leave me alone. That's when the front desk staff started paying attention. You could see it on their faces. A non-member confronting someone mid-workout is not normal gym behavior. One of the desk employees stepped out from behind the counter and asked if everything was okay. Karen jumped in before I could answer, explaining she was there on HOA business and enforcing compliance. The staffer blinked, then asked if she was a member. Karen said she didn't need to be. That response alone shifted the balance again. Now it wasn't resident versus HOA rep. It was private business versus unauthorized person. The staffer told her calmly that the gym was private property and that soliciting or confronting members wasn't allowed. Karen waved him off and said HOA authority superseded gym policies. That line got a couple quiet laughs from people pretending not to watch. The tension wasn't explosive yet, but it was thick. You could feel it building. She turned back to me and doubled down, saying she'd already documented the violation and that fines would follow. I told her clearly that she had no authority here and needed to stop. She scoffed and said residents don't get to pick when rules apply. That comment landed poorly, especially in a room full of people who weren't residents at all. The staffer stepped closer, now fully engaged, and told her she needed to leave the workout area. He wasn't rude. He wasn't loud. Just firm. That was the moment it became clear this wasn't going to end with her winning. Karen hadn't realized it yet, but the second she walked past that front desk without scanning in, she lost all leverage. Around us the gym kept moving but slower. People were watching without staring. Phones stayed down. No one wanted a scene, but nobody was missing it either. Karen still stood there clutching her clipboard like a shield, convinced she was in charge. She wasn't. The tension had officially shifted from HOA overreach to private property enforcement, and management hadn't even stepped in yet. This was just the early warning phase, and somehow she still thought she was running the room. The front desk employee didn't raise his voice or puff his chest. He walked over with the kind of calm that comes from dealing with nonsense on a regular basis and asked Karen a simple question. Was she a registered member or a guest of a member? The question landed harder than it sounded. It wasn't aggressive, but it forced a line to be drawn. Karen paused, clearly annoyed, then said she wasn't there to work out. She announced she was present strictly on HOA enforcement business. Like that should end the discussion. That answer changed the whole vibe. The employee nodded once, processing it, then explained calmly that HOA rules don't apply inside the gym. He pointed out that the facility is private property, governed by its own policies, and open only to members and their guests. He didn't argue bylaws or debate fashion. He just stated jurisdiction. That was the first real authority check, and it happened fast, right in front of everyone. Karen didn't accept it. She waved her hand like he was background noise and turned back to me, continuing her lecture about dress standards and community image. She acted like the staffer hadn't spoken at all. That move mattered. By ignoring him, she escalated from misunderstanding to defiance. The power dynamic shifted again because now she wasn't just bothering a resident. She was disregarding the business running the place. The staffer stepped slightly closer and repeated himself, slower this time. He said she couldn't confront members, issue notices, or conduct enforcement activities inside the gym. He asked her to step away from the workout area. His tone stayed professional, not heated. That calm made Karen's attitude look even more out of pocket. Karen scoffed and said residents don't get to hide from HOA rules by changing locations. She claimed authority follows people, not addresses. A couple folks nearby exchanged looks like, "Is she for real?" Someone on a treadmill shook their head. The social pressure was building and it wasn't on her side. I told her I wasn't engaging anymore and asked her to leave me alone. She ignored that too and tried again to hand me the violation form. I didn't touch it. That refusal shifted things yet again. Now it was clear I wasn't participating and she was the only one pushing. The staffer finally told her directly that if she wasn't a member or guest, she needed to leave the premises. That was the first clear directive. Not a suggestion. Not advice. A requirement. Karen bristled immediately and said she wasn't leaving until enforcement was complete. That line crossed another boundary. At that point she was no longer just wrong. She was trespassing. The front desk employee radioed the manager, keeping it low-key. No yelling. No scene. Just procedure. That quick action showed competence and prevented the situation from dragging out. Within minutes, the conflict had gone from awkward confrontation to formal handling. That pace mattered. Viewers hate when authority stalls and this didn't. Karen kept talking while the radio call went out, repeating her claims louder now, clearly trying to regain control through volume. She said fines would stack and records would reflect non-compliance. The words bounced off the mirrors but they didn't land. The room had shifted. People weren't listening to her anymore. They were watching her. The staffer stayed put, positioning himself between her and me without touching her. That physical placement was subtle but effective. It established who was actually in charge of the space. Karen noticed and snapped that he couldn't block her. He replied calmly that he absolutely could because it was his workplace. That moment sealed it. The first challenge to Karen had succeeded. Her authority claim had been checked, rejected, and overridden within minutes. She was still standing there, clipboard in hand, but the power she thought she had was gone. From here on out, every move she made would either comply or escalate. And judging by her clenched jaw and refusal to back off, escalation was coming fast. Karen didn't lower her voice when she realized the staff wasn't backing her. She did the opposite. She raised it, projecting across the gym so people on treadmills and cable machines could hear every word. It wasn't yelling yet, but it was loud enough to turn heads. She announced that HOA authority follows residents wherever they go, like it was some settled fact nobody had bothered to tell the world yet. That shift from one-on-one confrontation to public declaration changed the entire room. She leaned into it, saying homeowners don't get to escape standards just by leaving the neighborhood. According to her, rules are tied to people, not places. She said it slowly like she was teaching a class. A guy unracking dumbbells paused mid-lift. Someone else pulled an earbud out. The gym hadn't stopped, but attention had shifted, and that's exactly what she wanted. Karen took it further and threatened fines for what she called public indecency, citing HOA bylaws like she was reading from scripture. She gestured toward my tank top and said it violated decency rules meant to protect community image. The irony of saying that inside a gym full of people sweating in athletic wear was thick. A woman nearby snorted before catching herself. That moment chipped away at Karen's credibility fast. She started listing consequences, talking about escalating fines and documentation. Her voice echoed off the mirrors, and the more she talked, the less convincing she sounded. This wasn't a board meeting. This was a gym, and the context was eating her alive. The claims that might have scared someone in a driveway sounded ridiculous between squat racks. Several members stopped what they were doing entirely. One guy leaned against a machine with his arms crossed. Another paused a treadmill and stared openly. Nobody intervened, but nobody was buying it either. The social shift was brutal. Karen thought volume would give her control. Instead, it put her on display. She kept going, saying the HOA had a duty to enforce standards everywhere residents represent the community. That logic didn't land. The more she explained, the more eyes rolled. Someone muttered, "This is wild," loud enough for others to hear. Karen snapped a look in their direction but didn't address it. She was committed now. I stayed quiet. That silence mattered. Every second I didn't engage made her look more unhinged. She was arguing with the room, not me. The staffer stayed nearby, watching closely, letting her hang herself with words. That was a subtle power move. No interruption meant no excuse. Karen tried to reframe, saying the gym allowed inappropriate behavior and the HOA would note that. She said reports could go to corporate offices as if that should scare anyone. The threat fell flat. This wasn't her territory and everyone could feel it. The gym didn't answer to her, and neither did the people watching. Her tone sharpened when she realized the crowd wasn't on her side. She repeated the fine threat, louder, adding that refusal to comply would make things worse. That repetition didn't help. It made her sound desperate. Authority doesn't need to repeat itself. Confidence does. A trainer walked by, slowed, and stopped a few feet away, clearly clocking the situation. That added another layer of pressure. Karen noticed and stiffened. She wasn't in control of the audience anymore. The room had turned from passive to judgmental. She tried to wrap it up by saying she'd already documented everything and that enforcement would proceed regardless. That was meant to be a mic drop moment. It wasn't. The words hung there awkwardly, unsupported. No one reacted the way she expected. The credibility collapse was complete. What started as an attempt to assert power had turned into a public meltdown without shouting. People weren't angry. They were embarrassed for her. That's worse. She still stood there clutching her clipboard, but the authority she claimed was gone. By doubling down in public, Karen exposed the weakness of her position. The gym hadn't even escalated yet and she was already losing the room. The next move wouldn't be hers to make. She'd pushed too far, too loud, in a place where her rules meant nothing. And everyone watching knew it. The gym manager showed up fast, not rushing but not dragging his feet either. He walked out from the office with a tablet in hand, already briefed by the front desk through the headset. That alone shifted the room. Staff straightened up, members paused, and Karen finally stopped talking mid-sentence. When management steps in that quickly, it signals this isn't being ignored or brushed off. He positioned himself between Karen and the workout area, creating space without touching anyone. Calm, controlled, professional. He asked one short question: "Are you a member or a guest of a member?" Karen launched into her explanation again, saying she was there on HOA enforcement business and that she didn't need gym access to address a resident. The manager let her finish, then responded evenly that the gym is private property governed by its own rules. He explained that entry is limited to members, guests, and staff, and that confronting patrons or issuing notices isn't allowed. His tone wasn't sarcastic or condescending. It was matter-of-fact, like explaining posted hours. That clarity landed harder than yelling would have. The power shifted fully from staff-level handling to top-of-floor authority. Karen tried to interrupt, but he continued, clearly stating that HOA jurisdiction ends outside neighborhood boundaries. He said it plainly: no legal jargon, no wiggle room. Whatever authority she believed she had stopped at the HOA entrance sign, not at the gym door. That line cut through the noise and you could feel it land across the room. Karen bristled and insisted HOA bylaws override local rules, including business policies. She said residents represent the community everywhere and that standards follow them. The manager didn't argue philosophy. He corrected her once, saying HOA bylaws don't supersede private business rights or property law. He didn't repeat himself. That restraint made it clear he wasn't there to debate. A couple members nodded. Someone whispered, "Finally." Karen noticed the shift and raised her voice again, claiming the gym was interfering with lawful enforcement. The manager didn't react to the volume. He simply waited for her to finish and then issued a clear first warning to disengage. He told her she needed to stop addressing members immediately and leave the workout floor. That wasn't a suggestion. It was a directive. He explained that failure to comply would result in escalation. His delivery was calm, but the words carried weight. This was the last off-ramp before consequences. Karen scoffed and said she wasn't leaving until enforcement was complete. She demanded corporate contact information and claimed she'd file complaints. The manager acknowledged her right to complain and said she could do so after exiting the premises. That response mattered. It showed confidence. He wasn't afraid of paperwork threats. He gestured toward the front desk, indicating the exit path, and repeated that she needed to disengage. That was the only repetition, and it was intentional. Authority figures warn once, then escalate. He'd already warned her. The next step was procedural. Karen stood her ground, clutching the clipboard tighter like it gave her leverage. The room went quiet in that specific way that happens right before things move forward. Even the background music felt louder by comparison. Members waited, not anxiously but expectantly. Everyone knew what was coming next. The manager glanced toward the desk and gave a subtle nod. No announcement. No drama. Just a signal. Karen was still talking, still insisting her bylaws mattered here, completely missing that the decision had already been made. That's the thing about clearly defined authority. Once it's stated, refusal doesn't stall it. It just triggers the next step. By insisting HOA rules overrode gym policy, Karen locked herself into escalation. The manager had drawn the boundary cleanly and publicly. He didn't need to argue further. The warning had been issued, the jurisdiction explained, and the expectation set. From here on out, compliance or removal were the only options. Karen thought she was still negotiating. In reality, she'd already lost the floor. The gym wasn't her territory and management wasn't impressed by clipboards or confidence. Authority had been defined out loud in front of witnesses. The next move wouldn't be hers to control, and everyone watching could feel that shift settle in. Karen didn't back down after the warning. Instead, she escalated in the most predictable way possible. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and raised it chest high, angling the camera straight at me like she was about to catch a perp in the act. She said she needed photo evidence for enforcement records, loud enough for half the gym to hear. That move shifted everything instantly. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a policy violation. The manager reacted right away. He didn't yell or rush, but his tone hardened. He told her clearly that recording or photographing members inside the gym violated gym policy and member privacy. He explained that phones were allowed for personal use only, not for documenting other patrons. That explanation wasn't negotiable. It was a line clearly drawn. Karen ignored him completely and took another step closer, still filming. She said she was collecting enforcement evidence and that HOA documentation required proof. She even narrated into her phone, calling out my name and outfit like she was building a case file. A few members shifted uncomfortably. One guy shook his head and muttered, "This is getting real weird." The room felt tighter, like everyone was waiting for the snap. The manager repeated himself once, slower, making sure there was no confusion. He told her to put the phone away immediately. He added that continuing to record would result in removal from the premises. This was the second warning and it landed hard. Staff doesn't repeat themselves unless escalation is locked and loaded. Karen laughed and said she wasn't intimidated by gym rules. She claimed that HOA enforcement required documentation and that she had every right to gather it. That sentence mattered. She wasn't confused. She was choosing to ignore the policy. That choice flipped the situation from disagreement to refusal. The manager's posture changed. He stopped explaining and started directing. He told her to leave the premises immediately. No qualifiers. No please. Just a direct order. He pointed toward the front desk and said she could contact corporate from outside. That was the cleanest exit he could offer. Karen refused. She lowered the phone just enough to glare at him and demanded corporate contact information on the spot. She said she wasn't going anywhere until she got names, emails, and confirmation that the HOA would be respected. That demand crossed another line. She was no longer just violating policy. She was trespassing. A trainer nearby quietly guided a member away from the area, creating space. That subtle movement showed staff coordination kicking in. The manager didn't engage with Karen's demand. He simply told her again that she needed to leave and that corporate complaints didn't override removal. His calm made her look unhinged by comparison. Karen raised her voice, saying the gym was protecting rule breakers and that this would all be documented. She lifted the phone again, trying to capture the manager now. He stepped just out of frame and told her one last time to stop recording. That was it. The warning phase was officially over. The manager turned slightly toward the front desk and gave a brief nod. No theatrics. No countdown. Just procedure. Karen didn't notice at first. She was too busy talking into her phone, narrating like she was winning. That was the irony. She thought documentation gave her leverage. In reality, it sealed her removal. Members were fully watching now. No one looked entertained. It was that second-hand embarrassment vibe, where you don't want to look but can't look away. Karen stood there clutching her phone and clipboard, convinced she was in control, completely missing that control had already shifted away from her. By refusing to stop recording and refusing to leave, she'd stacked violations back to back. Gym policy breach. Privacy issue. Trespass. Each one escalated the response ladder. The manager didn't need to argue bylaws or philosophy anymore. This was operational. Karen demanded corporate info one more time, louder. The manager answered calmly that she'd receive it after exiting, and that if she didn't comply, security would escort her out. He didn't threaten. He stated outcome. That moment hung in the air. Karen stared at him, daring him to follow through. Phone stayed down. Music kept playing. The gym didn't pause for her ego. She'd crossed the line clearly and publicly, and everyone in the room knew the next step wasn't a debate. She thought she was forcing respect. What she actually did was trigger removal. And once someone refuses a direct order on private property, the ending writes itself. The manager didn't argue anymore. He didn't raise his voice or posture up. He simply turned his head toward the front desk and gave a short, practiced signal. That was it. No countdown, no drama. The escalation happened immediately, exactly the way it's supposed to when a private business hits the limit. The power in the room shifted again, clean and fast. Less than a minute later, 2 on-site security officers stepped out from the side corridor near the lockers. They weren't sprinting, but they weren't casual either. Radios clipped, eyes already scanning. They took in the phone held up, the clipboard, the manager's position, and the small crowd that had formed without anyone needing to explain a thing. That kind of awareness doesn't come from guessing. It comes from training. Karen spotted them and actually smiled for a split second, like reinforcements had finally arrived. She turned her phone toward them and announced, loud and proud, that security needed to assist with HOA enforcement. She said it like she expected them to nod and get to work. A couple members winced. You could almost hear the collective "oh no" in the room. One of the officers stopped a few feet away and addressed her directly. Calm voice. Neutral stance. He asked her to lower the phone. Karen ignored that and doubled down, insisting they answer to the HOA and were required to help enforce community standards. That statement landed flat. The officer corrected her immediately, explaining they were employed by the gym and answered only to gym management. No attitude. Just facts. She scoffed and said she paid HOA dues and that should count for something. The second officer stepped slightly to the side, controlling the space without touching anyone. He repeated that this was private property and that HOA authority did not apply inside the facility. That explanation mattered because it shut down the fantasy she'd been clinging to. Jurisdiction was no longer abstract. It was spelled out in front of witnesses. Karen tried to pivot, claiming she was being targeted for doing her job. She said the gym was interfering with lawful enforcement and that security was part of the problem now. The officers didn't react emotionally. They didn't debate motives. They asked one simple question. Would she comply and leave voluntarily? That question changed the stakes again. This was no longer about policy. It was about removal. She refused, saying she wasn't going anywhere until corporate got involved. She lifted the phone higher, clearly hoping to catch something dramatic. The lead officer issued a final warning, clear and unmistakable. He told her to stop recording, lower the phone, and exit the premises immediately. He added that failure to comply would result in escort out of the building. No threats. No yelling. Just outcome. The room went quiet in that specific way that means everyone knows the next move isn't optional. Karen looked around like she expected backup from the crowd. Nobody stepped in. A guy on a rowing machine shook his head. Someone near the mirrors whispered, "She's done." The social energy had completely flipped. Karen tried one last angle, saying she needed names and badge numbers. The officer replied she'd receive that information after leaving. He didn't move. He didn't repeat himself. That stillness was powerful. Authority doesn't rush when it's confident. The manager stayed back, letting security run the interaction. That handoff mattered. It showed proper escalation, not ego. The officers controlled the moment, not Karen's volume. She kept talking, but her words weren't driving anything anymore. When she still didn't comply, the officer stated plainly that she was now being directed to leave under security authority. He took one step forward, not aggressive, just decisive. That was the final shift. Karen's face changed. Not panic, but realization. This wasn't a bluff. She lowered the phone halfway, still muttering about complaints and reports. The officer repeated the direction once more, slower, giving her a chance to save face. That pause mattered. It showed professionalism. Karen hesitated, then shook her head and said she wasn't scared. That sealed it. The officers prepared to escort her out, hands visible, movements measured. No grabbing. No chaos. Just procedure kicking in. Members watched silently as the situation reached its unavoidable conclusion. At that point, Karen wasn't an HOA enforcer anymore. She was a non-member refusing to leave private property after multiple warnings. The escalation ladder had been climbed step by step, exactly how viewers want to see it happen. And now the next chapter was locked in. Karen didn't take the final warning as final. She talked right over it, voice jumping an octave, repeating that this was unlawful and that she dealt with bigger situations than this. Her words echoed off the mirrors, cutting through the music, grabbing everyone's attention whether they wanted it or not. That choice flipped the switch from potential compliance to confirmed removal. From that moment on, she wasn't arguing policy anymore. She was refusing a direct order. Security moved in immediately, one officer on each side, not touching her yet, just closing space. The lead officer told her she was being escorted out and asked her to cooperate so it could stay smooth. Karen snapped back that they had no right and accused them of abusing authority. Her volume climbed and heads across the gym turned in unison. The whole floor was locked in now. This wasn't background noise. This was the main event. When she still refused to walk, the officers gently guided her forward, hands open, movements controlled. No yanking. No shoving. Just firm direction. Karen protested loudly, saying she was being dragged even though her feet were moving. That exaggeration didn't land. Everyone could see it was professional and clean. The contrast made her look worse with every step. As they moved past the free weights, people paused mid-rep. A trainer stopped coaching. Someone pulled out an earbud. Karen kept talking, firing off accusations about retaliation and discrimination, hoping something would stick. Nothing did. The officers didn't respond to insults or commentary. They focused on the exit and kept the pace steady. By the time they reached the front desk, the manager stepped in again, positioning himself where she couldn't miss him. He told her clearly that she was now banned from the gym effective immediately. No debate. No timeline. Just done. That statement shifted the consequences from temporary removal to lasting impact. Karen froze for half a second, then exploded, demanding it in writing and threatening lawsuits. The manager didn't argue. He told her she'd receive written notice through corporate channels and that any attempt to return would be treated as trespassing. His tone was flat, almost bored, which somehow made it hit harder. Karen tried to interrupt, but the officers kept her moving toward the doors. As they pushed through the entrance, daylight flooded in and the sound changed. Outside noise replaced gym music. That physical shift mattered. Inside, she tried to control the room. Outside, she had nothing. The doors closed behind her with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. She turned back immediately, still talking, still angry, still convinced someone would cave. The officer nearest the door told her to step away from the entrance. She finally did, pacing on the sidewalk, phone out again, narrating to nobody in particular. Inside, the gym exhaled. The manager turned back to staff and told them to resume normal operations. That reset happened fast. Music volume came back up. Machines whirred. The spell broke. People shook their heads and got back to work, already turning the moment into gym lore. Behind the desk, the front manager pulled up the incident reporting system. Time stamps, warnings issued, refusal to comply, recording violation, removal, ban. It all went in while details were fresh. Security added their notes. No emotion. Just documentation. That paperwork locked the outcome in place. A few members quietly asked what happened. Staff kept it simple. Non-member refused to leave after violating policy. That was all anyone needed. Karen's version didn't matter in that space anymore. Outside, she lingered for a few minutes, clearly waiting for someone to engage. Nobody did. Eventually, she stomped off toward the parking lot, still muttering. Inside, no one followed. Authority doesn't chase drama. The entire escalation from warning to removal to ban took minutes, not half an hour. That mattered. There was no endless arguing, no stalling. She crossed the line, authority stepped in and consequences followed. Clean. Professional. Done. By the time I finished my workout, the gym felt normal again. Karen was gone, banned, documented, and powerless. The incident was already fading into a story people would tell later, not a disruption that lingered. That's how proper intervention looks. Fast, firm, and final. The gym snapped back to normal faster than anyone expected. Within minutes of the doors closing behind her, the music volume came back up, machines started humming again, and people picked up their workouts like nothing had happened. A trainer clapped his hands and called out a set count, breaking the leftover tension. The manager walked the floor once, checking in with staff, then disappeared back into the office. That quick reset mattered. It showed the disruption was handled, not lingering. As the adrenaline wore off, people started talking. Not yelling, not gossiping loudly, just that low gym chatter between reps. A guy on the bench shook his head and said it was wild someone thought HOA rules applied outside the neighborhood. Another laughed and said, "Imagine trying to find someone mid-squat." The irony landed clean. Everyone there understood how ridiculous the situation had been once it left HOA territory. A few members asked staff what her deal was. The front desk kept it short and professional. Non-member, policy violation, refusal to leave. No embellishment. That restraint actually made the story spread faster because people filled in the blanks themselves. The takeaway was obvious. HOA power doesn't travel. Later that evening, Karen tried her next move. She filed a complaint with Gym Corporate, alleging discrimination, harassment, and interference with lawful HOA enforcement. She attached her own notes and claimed management acted improperly. What she didn't realize was how airtight the documentation already was. Every warning, refusal, and policy citation had been logged in real time. Corporate reviewed it quickly. By the next morning, they backed management completely. Their response was blunt but professional. They stated she was not a member, violated privacy and recording policies, ignored multiple directives, and was removed appropriately. They confirmed the ban and closed the complaint. No investigation. No follow-up questions. That decision shut the door hard. Karen pushed again, sending a second email demanding reconsideration. Corporate responded once more, restating their position and advising her not to return to the facility. After that, they stopped engaging. That silence was intentional. Once a decision is final, further complaints don't change it. They just get logged. Inside the system, her actions were permanently recorded. Not just the ban but the attempted escalation, the false claims, and the refusal to comply. That kind of note doesn't disappear. If she ever tried this somewhere else under the same company umbrella, it would follow her. Consequences don't always look dramatic. Sometimes they look like a file that never goes away. Back on the gym floor, the story became gym lore by the end of the week. New people heard about the HOA lady, who tried to enforce rules next to the squat rack. Someone joked that HOA bylaws must expire at the parking lot. Another said it was the most unhinged thing they'd seen between cardio sessions. Humor replaced tension, which meant the incident had fully passed. What stood out was how fast real authority shut it down. No endless arguing. No waiting around. The moment she refused to follow directions, the system worked. Staff escalated, management intervened, security removed her, and corporate backed it. Clean chain. No gaps. Karen's credibility took a hit she couldn't undo. Even outside the gym, word spread. People talk. When someone hears you tried to flex HOA power in a private business and got bounced, that reputation sticks. It doesn't matter how confident you sounded in the moment. For me, it was over. I finished my workout, showered, and left without another interaction. No follow-ups. No emails. Nothing. That silence was the final shift. The issue was resolved so completely it didn't need closure. By the time I pulled out of the parking lot, the whole thing already felt smaller, like a weird story you'd tell later. That's how you know authority did its job. When chaos doesn't linger and consequences don't require drama, the system wins. Karen tried to turn it into a crusade. Instead, it became a footnote in a corporate log and a joke among lifters. Her actions were documented, her complaint denied, and her access gone for good. The gym moved on. Everyone else did too. And that's exactly how fallout is supposed to work when someone pushes past a line that was never theirs to cross. The consequences didn't stop at the gym doors. Within a few days, the HOA board realized the situation had escaped their bubble, and they moved fast to protect themselves. An email went out to residents from the board president, carefully worded and noticeably cautious. It stated that the actions taken at the gym were not authorized by the HOA and did not reflect official policy. Karen's name wasn't mentioned, but the distance was obvious. That message marked a clean break, the board stepping away from her behavior before it splashed back on them. Shortly after, a second clarification followed. This one spelled things out in plain language. HOA authority applies only within neighborhood boundaries and does not extend to private businesses or public spaces. For a lot of residents, that was a wake-up call. People had always assumed the HOA had broad power, but seeing it limited in writing changed the vibe. Group chats lit up, neighbors comparing notes, realizing how far Karen had been pushing things for years. Behind the scenes, the board took action that wasn't broadcast but traveled quickly anyway. Karen was removed from all enforcement-related duties. No more compliance checks. No more violation notices. No more just following the rules routine. She was reassigned to a non-enforcement role that didn't involve residents directly. That kind of move doesn't need an announcement to sting. Everyone notices when someone who used to flex power suddenly goes quiet. I received my own follow-up around the same time. A written confirmation from the HOA stated that there was no violation related to the gym incident and that no fines or records would be attached to my account. It was formal, stamped, and very clear. That letter mattered. It closed the loop and ensured there was no lingering nonsense down the line. The power dynamic shifted again, this time fully in my favor, with the board acknowledging the limit they'd crossed. Karen's reputation inside the HOA took a real hit after that. People who once nodded along to her enforcement talks started side-eyeing everything she said. At meetings, her comments didn't carry the same weight. Folks stopped deferring to her. That loss of credibility was worse than any formal punishment. Authority without trust doesn't work, and hers was cooked. Neighbors talked openly about it now. Someone joked that she tried to take HOA rules on tour and got shut down. Another said it explained why she was always so aggressive, like she thought power was portable. The humor wasn't cruel, but it was honest. Once people see behind the curtain, they don't forget it. The board's distancing was intentional and strategic. By making it clear she acted alone, they avoided legal exposure and reset expectations. That move also signaled to residents that enforcement would be handled differently going forward. Questions got answered more carefully. Citations were more precise. The whole operation slowed down and got less sloppy. Karen didn't disappear entirely, but she changed. She stopped knocking on doors. She avoided confrontations. At community events, she kept to herself, no clipboard in sight. When paths crossed, she offered tight smiles and moved on. That retreat spoke volumes. People who thrive on control don't back off unless they have to. For me, the whole thing faded into the background. No more emails. No more notices. No tension when I walked through the neighborhood. The written confirmation sat in my records, and that was that. The issue was resolved not through shouting or drama, but through clear boundaries and consequences. The biggest shift wasn't just Karen losing authority. It was the HOA being forced to define its limits publicly. Residents learned something important, and that knowledge didn't go away. Karen's attempt to overreach didn't just backfire on her. It recalibrated the entire neighborhood. By the end of the month, her name barely came up anymore except as a reference point. Remember when she tried to enforce rules at a gym? That's not the legacy anyone wants. Her reputation had changed from enforcer to cautionary tale, and there was no easy way to undo that. Once authority gets checked in public, it never quite feels the same again. Life went back to normal faster than I expected, which honestly felt like the biggest win. I kept going to the gym on my usual schedule, scanning in, lifting, zoning out with my headphones, no side comments, no awkward stares. Staff treated me exactly the same as before, which was the point. No notes on my account, no follow-ups, no whispers. The whole situation had been handled clean enough that it didn't leave residue behind. Karen, on the other hand, was gone from my orbit completely. She didn't show up at the gym again, didn't wait in the parking lot, didn't try to run into me anywhere else. If our paths crossed in the neighborhood, she made a sharp turn or suddenly found her phone fascinating. That avoidance wasn't accidental. It was self-preservation. People who lose authority publicly don't come back swinging. They disappear and hope time does the cleanup. A few weeks later, the HOA quietly updated its enforcement guidelines. No announcement, no meeting agenda highlight, just revised language posted to the portal. The changes were subtle but obvious if you'd been paying attention. Clear limits on where enforcement applied. Explicit statements about private businesses and public spaces being outside HOA reach. Less vague community standards talk, more precise wording. That wasn't an accident. Someone higher up had definitely stepped in and said, "We're not doing that again." Neighbors noticed. Stuff like that doesn't go unseen even when it's low-key. At the mailbox, someone joked that HOA rules must expire at the parking lot line. Another neighbor laughed and said they wished they'd known that years ago. The humor stuck because it was earned. Once people see where power actually ends, they don't forget it. The gym incident turned into one of those stories that gets better with retelling, not because it was dramatic but because it was clean. No screaming match. No viral meltdown. Just someone pushing past their lane and getting checked immediately. Folks appreciated that. There's something satisfying about watching boundaries enforced without chaos. What stood out most was how little effort it took once the right people stepped in. I didn't need to threaten lawsuits or make a scene. I didn't need to argue bylaws or clap back. All I did was stop engaging and let actual authority handle it. The system worked the way it's supposed to when someone tries to play boss where they don't belong. Karen's silence became permanent. No more enforcement emails from her. No more friendly reminders. Her name stopped popping up altogether. That absence told the whole story. Power that relies on intimidation collapses the moment it's challenged in the open. She learned that lesson the hard way. At the gym, things stayed chill. People moved on. New members had no idea anything had happened, and that was perfect. Drama that resolves properly doesn't need an encore. The staff handled it once, documented it, and never looked back. That's professionalism. Every now and then, someone would crack a joke mid-workout about HOA rules not surviving past the front desk. Everyone would laugh, then get back to lifting. The joke landed because it was true. Authority isn't portable. You don't get to carry it around like a badge and expect strangers to care. The whole thing reinforced something simple but important. Confidence without jurisdiction is just noise. You can talk loud, wave papers, and act official, but the moment you step into a space that isn't yours, none of that matters. Real authority doesn't argue. It shows up, sets the boundary, and moves on. Karen tried to take HOA power on the road. It didn't work. The gym didn't bend. Management didn't hesitate. Security didn't stall. Corporate didn't waffle. The chain held, and once it did, the situation ended fast. I kept lifting, Karen kept her distance, and the HOA adjusted quietly behind the scenes. No winners and losers announcement, just a clear reset. And that's how it should be. The final takeaway stuck with everyone who heard the story. HOA rules don't travel. Authority doesn't magically follow you into places it doesn't belong. Once you cross that line, you're just another person standing in someone else's space, hoping confidence will do the work law won't. And when that fails, it fails fast.
Alright, now I want to hear from you. Do you think she was completely out of the line here? Or do you believe authority sometimes goes too far? Drop your take in comments, I read every single one.